Tonight, we pull back the curtain on one of the most guarded institutions on Earth. A world of secrets, buried not by accident, but by intention. For centuries, the Vatican has stood as a symbol of faith and power. But hidden behind its sacred walls are stories too dangerous to be told. This is not just about dusty manuscripts or forbidden relics. It is about kings erased from history, bloodlines concealed in silence, and entire movements burned to ash so their truths would never see the light of day. Every gap in the record, every missing page, every strange symbol etched in stone whispers of a cover-up more deliberate than you were ever taught. Beneath the surface lies a vault of secrets so vast it does not just preserve history, it controls it. From hidden archives to forbidden symbols, from silenced heretics to buried treasures, the Vatican's story is one of power, protection, and concealment. So, before you think this is just another legend, ask yourself one question. What if the past you know was written to hide a truth you were never meant to find? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we uncover the 10 biggest cover-ups the Vatican does not want you to know. Imagine a time when kings were not crowned by priests, but by something older, deeper, hidden in the very strands of their hair. The Merovingians ruled Gaul from the 5th to the 8th century, yet almost no one today remembers their names. Clovis, Dagobah, and their long-haired heirs vanished from history as if the earth had swallowed them whole. But legends linger, whispered in the margins of chronicles, hidden beneath the rewritten pages of official histories. They speak of a line of kings chosen by God, not for their office, but for their blood. This was not just divine right by ceremony. This was divine right by lineage, a living inheritance that threatened the very foundations of the Church and the authority of Rome. Pepin the Short, and later Charlemagne, rose to power with papal blessing. Yet to do so, the Church had to erase those who came before. The Merovingians were not simply replaced. They were archived, hidden, folded into obscurity with careful precision. Saints that had once been venerated disappeared. Monasteries tied to their patronage were restructured, and burial sites were quietly neglected. Some traces survived, though, in the Liber Historia Francorum, early 8th century manuscripts described the Merovingians as chosen by God, a detail later removed under Carolingian supervision. Even saints like Dagobah II, once celebrated, were quietly desainted, not condemned, but erased. Why go to such lengths to hide them if they were merely weak kings? The answer lies in fear, not politics, but symbolism. Imagine a descendant of Christ walking through the courts of Europe, bearing a right that no pope could grant and no bishop could control. That right would turn theology into genealogy and faith into DNA, and perhaps this is why the Carolingian coup was not about replacing a dynasty, but replacing a myth. The myth of sacred blood, the idea that holiness could be inherited, not just appointed. Yet myths are stubborn and symbols endure. Look at the bee, for example. Found in the tomb of Clovis, hundreds of golden bees surrounded his body, each a tiny guardian, a declaration of eternal kingship and divine power. The bee was a message, not decoration, echoing across centuries into Napoleonic coronations and even Freemasonry. The Merovingians did not vanish. They adapted, leaving their story coded in symbols, architecture, and rituals. Their bloodline may have been hidden, diluted, and forgotten in name, yet it lingered, a quiet, impossible legacy. Today, when we walk past cathedrals, peer at crests, or notice a golden bee etched in stone, we are glimpsing a story centuries old. The Merovingians remind us that power, faith, and lineage can intertwine in ways the world would rather not remember, and that even in erasure, memory has a stubborn way of surviving. The Carolingians did not just win power, they rewrote the story of who had ever held it. The Merovingians, kings who once ruled Gaul with long hair flowing and sacred authority, suddenly disappeared from records, chronicles, and memory. Pepin the Short understood that legitimacy in the eyes of the Church was everything. His son, Charlemagne, took this even further. building an empire that fused religious authority and secular power into one unstoppable force. To make room for their rule, the Carolingians engaged in a quiet but methodical erasure. Chronicles were rewritten, mentions of Merovingian rulers were excised or softened, saints tied to the old kings were desainted, monasteries that had flourished under Merovingian patronage were reorganized, repurposed, or abandoned. Tombs and burial sites that once held the sacred remains of kings were neglected, left to crumble. The world was being told a story where the Carolingians had always been destined to rule. In the 8th century, when Pope Zachary sanctioned Pepin's rise, it was more than a religious approval. It was the signal that a new narrative had begun, and the old kings could be quietly forgotten. This was not a chaotic replacement. It was strategic. Every detail of history that suggested Merovingian legitimacy, every reference to divine right through blood, was removed or rewritten. Even the memory of Clovis, once a towering figure, was reshaped to minimize any connection to a bloodline that could challenge the church. What the Carolingians feared was not a rebellion, it was a myth. A lineage that claimed authority by something older than crowns and ceremonies, something inherent and untouchable. The Merovingians had represented a sacred inheritance, a bloodline that transcended offices and decrees. By removing them from history, the Carolingians were not just consolidating power, they were controlling memory itself. And yet, traces persisted. In early manuscripts, hints of Merovingian glory remained, cryptic and incomplete, evidence that erasure was never perfect. Artifacts, symbols, and coins still bore their marks. Scholars centuries later would notice these anomalies, tiny remnants that suggested something had been hidden deliberately. The Carolingians' success was not just in their rule, but in the silence they imposed. Whole regions would forget the names of kings who had once walked among them. The lesson was clear. To control power, one must control the story, and to secure a dynasty, one must sometimes make kings vanish without a trace. Yet, as history often proves, memory finds cracks. Symbols, architecture, and secret traditions survived, whispering that the Merovingians had existed, that their bloodline had mattered, and that the Carolingians' version of history was only one layer of a deeper truth. This was the subtle power of erasure, a reminder that what is forgotten is often more dangerous than what is remembered. The Merovingians did not just rule by blood, they ruled with signs, emblems, and symbols that carried messages only those who knew where to look could understand. One of the most famous of these was the bee. To most, a bee is a simple creature, busy, industrious, and harmless. But to the Merovingians, it represented immortality, resurrection, and divine kingship. In the tomb of Childrich, an early Merovingian king, over 300 golden bees were placed around his body. They were not decoration, they were a statement, a code in metal, telling the world that this king was connected to something eternal, something sacred. The bee was a symbol of soul and spirit. Across cultures, it carried weight. Egyptians believed bees were messengers between the mortal and divine realms. The Greeks linked bees to prophecy and insight. The Merovingians adapted this symbolism to mark their authority as kings whose legitimacy came from blood, not office. Then there is the fleur de lis. Known today as the emblem of French royalty, its origins are murky. Some say it is a flower, others a symbol of divine perfection. Scholars with an eye for esoteric history argue that it is a subtle nod to lineage, to the Holy Family, and to the idea of inherited sacredness. Its 3 petals may echo father, mother, and child, a hidden recognition of a bloodline that carries divine essence. In coins, frescoes, and architecture, other symbols appear. 7-pointed stars mark spiritual and earthly authority. Spirals and knots suggest eternity and cycles. Some crosses inverted or twisted were not blasphemy but encoded messages, misunderstood by later generations. These signs survived the Carolingian erasure because they were subtle. They were carved into floors, tiled into walls, hidden in mosaics, or woven into robes and tapestries. They spoke in a language of geometry, repetition, and quiet reverence. Napoleon Bonaparte, centuries later, would resurrect the bee during his coronation in 1804, stitching golden bees into his robe and on banners. Some say he consciously reached back to claim the line of kings before the Carolingians, linking himself to a sacred past. Churches with Merovingian roots hold anomalies too. Chapels dedicated to Mary Magdalene, pillars placed in precise ratios, spiral motifs, all suggest a knowledge older than the mainstream church doctrine. Even coins from the period bear coded images, stars, and flowers that make sense only in the context of Merovingian symbolism. This hidden visual language was a way for a fallen dynasty to survive. It spoke to those who understood and left clues for generations to follow. It reminded the world that even when kings vanish from chronicles, the messages of power and sacred inheritance endure. Symbols, when read carefully, whisper the stories history has tried to erase. And the Merovingians knew this better than anyone. For centuries, whispers have told a story of Mary Magdalene not ending her life in the Holy Land, but fleeing across the sea to the southern coast of France. The village of Sainte Marie de la Mer is said to be where a small boat, with no sails or crew, drifted ashore, carrying her and a handful of followers. Local legend says she brought with her the earliest flame of Christianity in Europe. She was not alone, for tradition speaks of Mary Salome and Mary Jacobee accompanying her, creating a trio of Marys who became central figures in Provençal devotion. Pilgrims arrived from far and wide to honour not just one Mary, but these three. Over centuries, this devotion merged Catholic reverence with older, almost pagan rituals. Candles floating on water, chants over firelit sands, and the Romani people dancing in celebration of Saint Sarah, believed to have travelled with them. The presence of these women is remembered not just in folklore, but in tangible relics. In the nearby town of Saint Maximin, a basilica built in the 13th century claims to house her bones, her skull encased in a golden reliquary, red hair still clinging to the bone. DNA tests are said never to have been allowed, yet the relics are authenticated by the Church. Pilgrims who visit the crypt often report a tension, a sense that something is left unspoken, a secret hovering over centuries. Beyond relics, the landscape itself preserves memory. La Sainte Baume, a cave high in the Provençal mountains, is believed to be where Mary Magdalene spent her last 30 years in contemplation. Pilgrims walk long trails barefoot in reverence, tracing the path of a woman whose story was almost erased. Frescoes from the 6th century show her as a regal figure, dressed in blue, holding a vessel, standing beside a child. These depictions predate the official veneration of Mary Magdalene by hundreds of years, suggesting her legend was alive long before the Church codified it. Over time, whispers grew darker and more controversial. Some claimed that Mary Magdalene bore a child, that the bloodline of Christ continued through her descendants in France. Mainstream historians dismiss this as impossible, yet the quiet preservation of genealogies among noble families in southern France hints at secrecy, reverence, and strategic protection. This line of thought connects to the Merovingian dynasty, believed by some to have preserved sacred blood. Across villages, chapels, and family estates, stories of red-haired women with gentle voices, of children resembling forgotten kings, persisted orally for generations. These were never meant for history books, but for memory. It was a bloodline protected not by armies, but by secrecy, devotion, and faith. The idea of Mary Magdalene in France, whether true or legend, becomes the starting point for understanding the survival of sacred inheritance. It is a story of escape, of survival, and of lineage quietly threading through time, hidden in plain sight, awaiting those who look closely enough to see. In the early 14th century, the Knights Templar were suddenly hunted, arrested, and accused of heresy across France. King Philip the Fair expected to seize their treasure, yet when his men stormed the Templar headquarters in Paris in the year 1307, the vaults were empty. Nothing remained, no gold, no scrolls, no relics of immense value. This absence sparked centuries of rumours and legends about a hidden Templar treasure far beyond the reach of kings. Some believed the Templars had smuggled it out of Jerusalem during their excavations beneath the Temple Mount. They had spent nearly a decade digging under the guise of renovations, and in that time uncovered objects, manuscripts, and possibly sacred remains that challenged the very foundation of Christendom. Among the whispers was the most explosive theory that the Templars had found proof of the bloodline of Christ, evidence that Jesus had a wife, a child, and that this family line had survived. If true, it would have upended every notion of divine authority held by popes and kings. Some researchers claim that this treasure was never material at all. Golden artifacts might have been symbolic, a metaphor for knowledge and lineage, something so powerful it could not exist in the open. After the arrest of the Templars, it is said that a few members fled, carrying scrolls, relics, and secret records to remote locations in France, hiding them under layers of codes, cryptic symbols, and encrypted maps, only understood by initiates. Locations like Rennes-le-Château, Gisors, and the Château de Blanchefort are repeatedly mentioned, sites where patterns in the landscape align with celestial formations, suggesting deliberate concealment. Stories of Arnaud de Ville, a 14th century alchemist and scholar, describe vessels not of clay or gold, but of lineage, sealed across generations, possibly tied to the Merovingian descendants. After the Templars were disbanded by papal decree, some members found refuge in Portugal, forming the Order of Christ. Under this new banner, they constructed monasteries with hidden iconography, octagonal towers, bees, lilies, and spirals, believed to encode knowledge rather than wealth. Some legends claim that Templar ships even sailed north to Scotland, where they found protection among clans and left traces of their secrets in Rosslyn Chapel. Here, carvings of plants, angels, and bees appear, seemingly out of place, yet deliberately preserved. The story of the Templar treasure is both literal and symbolic, blending history, legend, and speculation. Its purpose may not have been to enrich, but to protect, to hide evidence of a bloodline that could change the world. Despite centuries of treasure hunters, scholars, and adventurers, the true nature of the Templar treasure remains a mystery. Some believe it is still waiting, hidden under stones, in caves, or encoded in symbols for those who know how to read them. Others think its real power was never gold or relics, but the secret knowledge that could shift authority from rulers to blood, from church to family. A secret kept alive in whispers, carvings, and coded manuscripts. Across Europe, hidden in abbeys, private libraries, and the vaults of noble families, mysterious parchments have surfaced that hint at a story the world was never meant to read. These texts are not ordinary. They are coded, obscured with symbols, acrostics, and secret alphabets that only a few could decipher. In the year 1352, a parchment known as the Parchment of Blanfort was discovered in southern France. Its Latin phrases twisted into riddles spoke of guardians and bloodlines, mentioning a lineage of kings in exile, protected across generations. Some interpreted the words as metaphor, others believed they documented a living genealogy stretching from Jesus and Mary Magdalene to secret heirs hidden in plain sight. For centuries, documents like this were quietly passed from hand to hand. Monks and scribes who understood their value encoded the texts further, placing them in false bindings or folding them into sacramental books. Even the Templars are said to have protected such documents, transferring them from Jerusalem to Europe before their dissolution. Scholars who glimpsed these parchments describe them as chilling in their precision. Names, dates, and places appear alongside symbols of bees, roses, and intricate geometric shapes. Some writings detail lineages that seem impossible to verify, yet they repeat across multiple sources, suggesting coordination and deliberate preservation. In the year 1423, a private collector in northern France reportedly held a fragment depicting a woman and child seated beside Jesus, the woman's hand resting on her belly, implying a maternal connection to the Holy Line. This fragment vanished shortly after discovery, adding to the mythos surrounding these secret texts. Other parchments, discovered in Spain and Italy during the 16th century, are said to carry cryptic instructions for safeguarding descendants, detailing marriages, estates, and safe havens. Some researchers argue that the texts encode astronomical alignments, linking bloodlines to celestial events, suggesting that timing, not just secrecy, was essential for protection. During the late 17th century, the Vatican began collecting certain forbidden books and manuscripts, sequestering them in the Apostolic Archive. Documents that referenced alternative gospels or the possibility of Christ's offspring were placed under strict control, some supposedly classified under secrecy for centuries. Modern historians debate the authenticity of these manuscripts. Skeptics argue that forgeries and embellishments cloud the truth, yet the recurring themes, the symbols, and the careful preservation across centuries suggest that someone considered these texts immensely important. Whether these parchments recorded truth, legend, or coded morality, they carry a weight that resonates through time. They are messages to the future, warnings or instructions hidden in words and images. Scholars, adventurers, and conspiracy enthusiasts continue to search for these texts, believing that within their intricate codes lies a revelation capable of reshaping history. The parchments of power are not just relics. They are whispers of a lineage, a secret preserved in ink and vellum, waiting for those patient enough to uncover the story that centuries of authority tried so hard to erase. In the rolling hills of southern France, a group once lived who challenged the power of Rome not through armies, but through faith and secrecy. They were called the Cathars, and during the 12th and 13th centuries, they flourished in regions like Languedoc, nurturing communities built on purity, simplicity, and devotion. Their beliefs were radical for the time. They taught that the material world was a prison, a creation of an evil force, while the spirit belonged to a higher, benevolent God. They rejected the authority of priests and cathedrals, living lives of extreme humility and devotion. But beyond their theology, some historians suggest that the Cathars held another secret, one that was far more dangerous to the powers of the Church. Rumours whispered that they were guardians of knowledge, protectors of sacred bloodlines hidden since the fall of the Merovingian kings. The regions they occupied overlapped almost perfectly, with places tied to legends of hidden heirs, secret relics, and the escape of those fleeing persecution. Some believed that their monasteries and castles were not just spiritual havens, but safe houses where documents, parchments, and even people were protected from inquisitors. In the year 1209, Pope Innocent III declared the Albigensian Crusade, a holy war unlike any before, aimed at eradicating the Cathars. Cities were besieged, villages destroyed, and tens of thousands killed. The massacre at Béziers became infamous, with entire populations slaughtered under the command to kill them all and let God sort his own. Yet, even in the face of such violence, the Cathars reportedly managed to smuggle treasures and texts away. Some of these were said to contain genealogies, secret gospels, and evidence of the holy bloodline that the Church had long sought to suppress. The last stronghold, Montségur, fell in 1244 after a prolonged siege. Over 200 perfects were burned alive, yet some legends claim that a handful escaped under cover of darkness, carrying what was most precious with them. These survivors may have continued the work of safeguarding secrets for generations, dispersing knowledge across Europe, hiding it in abbeys, noble houses, and even within oral traditions. Scholars debate the truth of these claims. No surviving Cathar texts explicitly detail bloodlines, yet the consistency of folklore, symbols, and regional continuity suggests more than mere coincidence. Bees, roses, and cryptic inscriptions appear repeatedly in areas tied to Cathar history, suggesting encoded messages or instructions. Modern researchers have traced these motifs in architecture, religious sites, and heraldry, connecting them with the legends of the Merovingian descendants. Whether myth or fact, the Cathar's connection to hidden knowledge reminds us that not all heresy was spiritual. Some of it was genealogical, a quiet rebellion against the rewriting of history. Their courage and secrecy allowed stories, symbols, and perhaps even bloodlines to survive the flames, preserving a fragile link to a past the world was forbidden to remember. The Cathars did not merely die in fire. In the shadow of persecution, they became the silent keepers of a secret, one whose echoes still hum through southern France and beyond. Imagine walking through endless corridors, lined with shelves taller than buildings, each shelf packed with documents older than many countries themselves. This is the Vatican Apostolic Archive, a place where secrets accumulate quietly, hidden behind iron doors and Latin inscriptions. Scholars who gain access describe a hushed world where centuries of decisions, correspondences, and records exist. Yet certain pages are mysteriously missing. Letters from popes during the 7th and 8th centuries vanish just when crucial events, like the deposition of the last Merovingian king, took place. Entire stretches of papal correspondence are absent, leaving gaps that make historians uneasy. Who decided these records should disappear, and why? Was it simple bureaucracy, or something far more deliberate? Some of the most intriguing rumours involve documents allegedly detailing secret lineages, unrecognised heirs, and evidence of sacred bloodlines tied to Christ himself. In the mid-20th century, a Jesuit priest and theologian, Father Malachi Martin, hinted repeatedly that the Church had long known of such a bloodline, though he never named names or produced proof. Scholars speculate that references to lost Gospels, forbidden books, and non-canonical saints were collected and sequestered here for study, not destruction. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the infamous list of banned texts, included works that questioned traditional teachings about Jesus, his family, and Mary Magdalene. These were not destroyed entirely but placed under church supervision, tucked away where only the approved could study them. Monks, scribes, and secretive clerics may have worked quietly for generations, encoding knowledge in texts that outwardly appeared ordinary, while hiding revolutionary truths beneath the ink. The gaps in records during the reigns of popes, such as Zachary and Sylvester II, are particularly curious. Letters and decrees that should exist have no trace, and the absence aligns with moments of political or spiritual tension, suggesting deliberate redaction. Some scholars claim that maps, genealogies, and coded parchments lie deep within the archive, untouched, unread, and intentionally obscured. Access is strictly controlled. Scholars must submit requests months in advance, and even then, only a few are allowed entry each year. This controlled access fuels speculation, giving rise to theories that the archive is not merely a historical library, but a battleground of knowledge where powerful secrets are preserved. Whether it is genealogical records, evidence of the Merovingian bloodline, or hidden Gospels, the Vatican archives remain a symbol of mysteries too dangerous to release. Some suggest that the real power of the archive is not in what it openly contains, but in what is deliberately concealed. The very act of hiding creates authority and control. For centuries, the Church has not only shaped faith, but also the narrative of history, choosing what the world should remember and what it should forget. And somewhere in those endless shelves, beneath layers of dust and time, the truth waits patiently for eyes prepared to see it. Imagine hidden chambers where shadows stretch long over stone floors and the air smells of wax and old wood. Here, some say, secret societies quietly preserve what history tried to erase. The Priory of Sion, the Freemasons, and even obscure noble families have been whispered about as guardians of a sacred lineage that stretches back centuries. Legends tell of men and women who pledged their lives not to wealth or power, but to a legacy older than kingdoms themselves. They worked in silence, passing coded knowledge through symbols, rituals, and initiation ceremonies. Bees, roses, spirals, and cryptic letters were not mere decoration. They were messages meant to endure beyond memory and time, a language only the initiated could understand. The Freemasons, for instance, are famous for allegories and rituals, but some researchers claim these were carefully designed to encode genealogical truths. A handshake, a compass and square, a secret phrase might point to a hidden line of descent, not simply moral lessons. The Priory of Sion, long dismissed as myth, is connected to certain noble families in France who allegedly maintained the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene through centuries of careful marriages. Names, dates, marriages, and symbols were all quietly recorded, encrypted in plain sight for those trained to read them. Even the Knights Templar, before their abrupt fall in the early 14th century, are rumoured to have been protectors of this secret. During their time in Jerusalem, while digging beneath the Temple Mount, some believe they uncovered relics and documents that traced sacred bloodlines. When Philip IV ordered their arrest in 1307, much of what they protected vanished into secret vaults, hidden estates, and loyal households. From France to Portugal to Scotland, the trail continues, with Rosslyn Chapel in the mid-15th century often cited as a repository of symbols and encoded messages. Spiral staircases, hidden frescoes, carved plants, and cryptic numerology all point to knowledge preserved over centuries. Initiates were trained to understand these codes, to memorize details of genealogy and ritual, to guard the story while blending into ordinary life. Allegedly, this system of custodianship continued well into the modern era. Some claim that even today, descendants of these orders maintain awareness of the line, protecting it digitally, socially, and culturally, embedding traces into architecture, art, and archives. These custodians were careful, knowing that a single mistake could expose the secret and endanger the bloodline. Across generations, this quiet vigilance has created a web of guardians whose lives revolve around preservation, not power. They do not announce themselves, they do not seek fame. Their work is the persistence of memory, the survival of a legacy that cannot be allowed to vanish. In a world of shifting politics and burning records, these custodians may be the reason whispers of sacred lineage have survived at all, waiting for someone capable of seeing the pattern, tracing the symbols, and understanding the story they have protected for centuries. Imagine walking through the glittering halls of a royal palace, velvet curtains brushing the marble floors, portraits of kings and queens staring silently from their frames. What if some of those rulers carried a secret far older than their crowns, a hidden lineage reaching back to the Merovingians, the dynasty so carefully erased centuries ago? Historians have long noted that European royalty is deeply interconnected. Kings and queens of Spain, France, and England often married cousins and distant noble families, creating a web of bloodlines stretching across centuries. While official records trace descent from Charlemagne and other known dynasties, genealogists have speculated that some lines could secretly carry Merovingian genes, particularly through daughters whose names quietly disappear from chronicles. The Habsburgs, for example, were masters of dynastic marriages, weaving together European power and blood in ways that could have concealed older lines. Could some of their ancestry trace back to Merovingian kings, preserved not through throne but through careful union and secrecy. The Bourbons and Plantagenets also carry mysterious names repeated over generations, faint echoes of forgotten rulers. Some claim that the persistence of certain names, like Dagobah or Theodoric, in obscure family trees is no coincidence but a deliberate act of remembrance. Even in modern times, constitutional monarchies such as the British, Swedish, or Belgian royal houses might carry faint traces of Merovingian ancestry. It is impossible to verify through DNA because royal families guard their genetics as fiercely as their crowns, but genealogical research suggests some connections could exist through centuries of marriage alliances. Beyond the official history, the symbols of monarchy hint at hidden continuity. Bees, fleurs de lis, and roses appear in crests, jewellery, and ceremonial robes, not just as decoration but perhaps as coded reminders of an older legacy. When Napoleon Bonaparte resurrected the bee in 1804, some historians argue he was acknowledging a deeper, forgotten lineage. Even today, ceremonial objects, crowns, and rings might carry traces of this past, subtle reminders embedded in plain sight. It is fascinating to consider that behind the pomp and protocol, a lineage erased from chronicles may still persist quietly. Royals might unknowingly carry genes passed down from kings whose names were scrubbed from history, their bloodline surviving centuries of political upheaval, revolution, and rewriting of history. The possibility raises questions about the very nature of power and inheritance. Perhaps the bloodline matters not for ruling, but for continuity, a secret whispered across generations through names, symbols, and marriages. Whether these connections are fact or fancy, the patterns are too persistent to ignore completely. In the halls of modern royalty, beneath the polished floors and glittering chandeliers, echoes of the Merovingian line may still live on, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to notice, someone willing to follow the trail across time and history. Pierre Plantard was a French man with a fascination for secret histories and hidden bloodlines. In the mid-20th century, he claimed to be the direct descendant of the Merovingian kings, the very dynasty that had been erased from history by the Carolingians. His story seemed impossible but captivating, a living link to a line supposedly touched by divinity itself. Plantard was central to the creation of the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail, published in 1973, a book that sparked imaginations and controversy around the world. The authors, Michael Bygant, Richard Ley, and Henry Lincoln, explored the idea that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a child whose bloodline survived secretly in southern France. They presented Plantard as a modern guardian or descendant of that sacred line, using historical coincidences, genealogical speculation, and cryptic documents to weave a compelling narrative. Plantard claimed the Priory of Sion, a secretive organization, had long protected this bloodline, ensuring its survival across centuries, and that he himself was at the center of this ancient conspiracy. The story quickly captured public attention because it combined kings, secret societies, and a lineage that challenged everything people thought they knew about Christianity. Critics were skeptical almost immediately. Scholars pointed out that many of the documents Plantard cited were later revealed to be forgeries and that he had manipulated historical records to support his claims. The Priory of Sion, long considered ancient, was exposed as largely a creation of Plantard and his associates, a modern invention masquerading as history. Yet, despite these revelations, the narrative refused to disappear. People were fascinated by the possibility that a holy bloodline survived in secret, protected by shadowy groups, and embedded in symbols hidden in churches and landscapes. Holy Blood, Holy Grail became a cornerstone for later works of fiction and conspiracy, inspiring millions to question accepted history and look for hidden patterns in European genealogy. The controversy over Plantard is as much about the human desire to believe as it is about historical fact. He crafted a story that allowed people to imagine a world where ordinary history concealed extraordinary truths. Even after he admitted in court in 1993 that many claims were false, the myth persisted. The ideas planted by Plantard and popularized in Holy Blood, Holy Grail still influence books, movies, and theories about secret bloodlines today. His legacy is a reminder that history can be rewritten not only by kings and popes, but by those who wield imagination, documents, and a willingness to blur the line between fact and fantasy. Whether or not any Merovingian bloodline survives, Plantard's story ensured that people would never stop wondering if the past held secrets powerful enough to shape the present. In the 21st century, tracing hidden bloodlines has moved from dusty archives to the digital realm. Computers and algorithms can now analyze centuries of genealogical records in ways humans never could. Entire libraries of church records, noble family trees, and obscure manuscripts are being digitized and made searchable for the first time. This allows researchers to detect patterns that might have been invisible to previous generations, connections across regions and centuries that hint at lineages carefully preserved in secrecy. Artificial intelligence can scan thousands of pages in minutes, linking names, dates, and events to reconstruct complex family trees. Algorithms are able to recognize recurring symbols, repeated names, and geographic clusters that might suggest hidden networks of descent. In some cases, AI can even cross-reference documents from multiple countries, linking obscure parish records in France with wills in Italy and census records in England, building a web of connections that no single scholar could accomplish alone. Crowdsourcing has become another powerful tool. Online communities share digitized documents, images, and transcriptions, allowing amateur historians and enthusiasts to collaborate globally. People are tracing family histories with unprecedented speed, sometimes discovering connections to regions, symbols, or names associated with the Merovingian legacy. Genetic testing adds another layer to this digital revolution. DNA analysis can suggest common ancestry across populations, revealing shared markers that align with historical genealogical claims. While it cannot confirm legendary bloodlines, it can highlight unexpected relationships, prompting further research. Some researchers are even combining DNA data with old manuscripts to find correlations between historical records and living families, seeking the faintest threads of a hidden lineage. The challenge lies in interpretation. Digital tools provide patterns, not proof. Historical records are messy, incomplete, and often contradictory. But technology gives investigators the ability to ask questions in ways that were impossible before. Metadata from scanned documents can reveal who wrote or copied records, when they were modified, and how information traveled through time. Even subtle consistencies in phrasing or handwriting can indicate networks of influence or shared knowledge about a lineage. In the search for the Merovingian bloodline, these methods have become invaluable. Parchments once locked away in the Vatican, obscure legal documents, and forgotten village records can now be cross-referenced for hidden clues. Digital reconstruction allows patterns in geography, naming, and social ties to emerge with clarity. It is a new frontier in the centuries-old quest to uncover what history has tried to hide. In this era, the bloodline may no longer need to be physically guarded in remote chapels or castles. Its traces live in data, in connections, in patterns. The search has moved from stone and parchment into code and algorithms, and every new discovery brings the tantalizing possibility that centuries of secrecy might finally be mapped, understood, and perhaps even verified in ways never before imaginable. In the year 1804, Paris was alive with a sense of ceremony unlike any other. Napoleon Bonaparte was about to be crowned Emperor of the French, a man whose ambition was matched only by the grandeur of the coronation itself. The Cathedral of Notre Dame was packed with nobles, clergy, and foreign dignitaries, yet among all the pomp there was a subtle symbol that many overlooked: the golden bee. Tiny, intricate, and gleaming, the bee adorned Napoleon's coronation robe, stitched into the velvet with painstaking care. To the average observer, it might have been just a decoration, a flourish of style meant to impress. But to those familiar with the deeper history of France, the bee carried echoes of a forgotten dynasty, the Merovingians. The Merovingians, ancient kings whose lineage was said to be sacred, had chosen the bee as a symbol of immortality, resurrection, and divine kingship. Over centuries, the emblem had been buried, replaced by the fleur-de-lis as the primary symbol of French monarchy. Napoleon, whether consciously or not, revived the emblem of the bee, and with it, a whisper of the line it once represented. The choice was deliberate or instinctive, but its effect was profound. The bee was not merely a decoration, it was a statement, a connection to a sacred past that had been erased from history. Crowds may have marvelled at the grandeur of the robes, the richness of the gold, the ceremonial gestures, but the bees carried a message that spoke of continuity, of kingship, rooted not in power alone, but in a lineage believed to hold divine favour. Napoleon's coronation was itself a careful blend of tradition and innovation. He famously crowned himself, taking the crown from the Pope's hands and placing it upon his own head. This act symbolised that authority did not only flow from the Church, yet the presence of the bees quietly acknowledged the spiritual and historical legacy of France's earliest rulers. In the days and years following the coronation, historians and scholars debated the meaning of Napoleon's choice. Some argued it was purely aesthetic, inspired by archaeological discoveries of Merovingian tombs and relics. Others claimed Napoleon was connecting himself to a deeper claim of legitimacy, consciously or unconsciously positioning himself as heir, not just to the French throne, but to a line of sacred kings. Regardless of intention, the bee became a powerful emblem. Napoleon used it in his banners, official documents, and imperial insignia, ensuring that the symbol would outlast the fleeting moment of his coronation. Its revival sparked curiosity, drawing attention to a lineage that had been systematically erased by the Carolingians and later monarchs. In subtle ways, the bee acted as a bridge, connecting the present to a past long hidden, and reminding all who noticed that symbols endure even when dynasties fall. The resurrection of the Merovingian bee in Napoleon's reign is more than historical trivia. It is a testament to the persistence of memory, the quiet survival of symbols, and the way that emblems can carry meaning across centuries. Through a simple insect stitched in gold, the story of a sacred bloodline whispered again in the heart of Europe. In the quiet halls of old Masonic lodges, symbols seem to whisper secrets across centuries. Freemasonry, known to many as a society of men in sashes performing ritual and ceremony, may have been more than just a social club. Some researchers believe that the Freemasons played a hidden role in preserving the legacy of the Merovingians, safeguarding knowledge of a bloodline that the Carolingians and later rulers tried to erase. The beehive, a symbol often seen in Masonic iconography, mirrors the same emblem found in Merovingian tombs and Napoleon's coronation robes. In the year 1763, lodges in Scotland and France began adopting elaborate rituals filled with allegories of death, rebirth, and divine kingship. And some historians suggest these rituals were not purely moral lessons, but reenactments of stories meant to keep memory alive. Members swore secrecy, carried symbols on rings, badges, and documents, and passed knowledge in ways that only those initiated could interpret. The twin pillars of Boaz and Jachin, so prominent in Masonic architecture, may have been more than biblical references. To those who read between the lines, they represented gateways, thresholds, or markers pointing toward hidden truths tied to lineage and sacred authority. It is said that some degrees of the Scottish Rite explicitly reference a death and resurrection ritual associated with a king, a figure not defined as Christ, but connected to a divine line. Through allegory, metaphor, and carefully preserved texts, the Freemasons may have kept fragments of Merovingian history alive even as the Church tried to suppress it. During the 18th century, as revolutionary ideas spread across Europe, lodges in Paris and Edinburgh became hubs not only of intellectual discussion, but also of coded preservation. Names, dates, symbols, and genealogies were sometimes hidden in ritual chants, frescoes, or diagrams on lodge floors. Visitors might have seen them as mere decoration, yet for those initiated, they spoke of continuity, lineage, and sacred inheritance. Across the Atlantic, American Freemasons, many of whom were founding fathers, carried the same symbols and allegories with them. In cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., architecture and ceremonial layouts echoed those same lessons. The compass and square, the all-seeing eye, and even hidden pentagrams may be more than symbolism of moral guidance. They may be a silent tribute to a history that could not be recorded openly. The secrecy of Freemasonry provided protection. In an era when papal authority and monarchy could punish or erase, Masonic lodges offered a place to preserve knowledge without drawing attention. The question remains whether this was intentional preservation of Merovingian bloodlines or coincidental reuse of symbols. But the patterns repeat too often across centuries and continents to ignore. Through lodges, rituals, and allegories, the legacy of the Merovingians may have been carried in plain sight, waiting for those who could recognize it. To the casual observer, a beehive, a rose, or twin pillars might seem decorative. To an initiated Mason, they may be markers pointing toward a lineage older than kingdoms, older than nations, preserved in secret, silent, and enduring. In the rolling hills of Scotland, standing silently over the village of Roslin, is a chapel that has puzzled historians for centuries. Roslin Chapel, built in the mid-15th century by William Sinclair, is a structure unlike any other. Every corner, every carved stone, seems to speak in code. Legends suggest that the Sinclair family, who commissioned the chapel, held ties to the Knights Templar and may have inherited sacred knowledge, perhaps even fragments of the Merovingian bloodline. The architecture is strange, almost otherworldly. The pillars curve in ways that defy easy explanation, and carvings of plants, some not even native to Europe, appear alongside angels and crosses. Some of these plants, like maize and aloe, would not have been known in Europe until after the voyage of Columbus, yet they appear in stone decades earlier. Scholars debate whether this was symbolic, esoteric, or evidence of knowledge brought from afar. Freemasons and historians alike have noted that Roslin Chapel contains dozens of symbols associated with the Templars, including the double-headed eagle, hidden crosses, and intricate geometric patterns. Some believe that these carvings were designed to preserve secrets in plain sight, messages only readable to those initiated into the right traditions. In local lore, the Sinclair family kept chambers beneath the chapel, sealed and inaccessible, containing scrolls, genealogies, and relics passed down from the Templars. Ground-penetrating radar has hinted at these spaces, but no official excavation has ever been permitted. It is said that the Sinclairs acted as custodians, protecting knowledge that could destabilize kingdoms or challenge the authority of the Church. During the late 14th century, when Henry Sinclair allegedly sailed to the lands of the New World in what is now Nova Scotia, he may have carried with him not just gold and provisions, but sacred objects and documents. Some claim these were linked to the bloodline, and the Templar treasure moved to safety across the Atlantic. Even in the modern era, scholars and amateur treasure hunters return to Roslin Chapel, studying every carving, measuring the angles, tracing patterns along walls and ceilings, searching for hidden messages. Some think the chapel contains encoded maps, leading to Templar secrets or lost Merovingian documents. Others argue it is a symbolic monument, meant to preserve memory rather than physical objects. Whatever the truth, the air around Roslin Chapel feels different. Visitors often describe an unease or an electric anticipation, as if the stones themselves are waiting for someone to understand their message. The Sinclair family's connection to the Templars, the mysterious carvings, the hidden chambers, and the whispers of voyages to the New World all point to a story layered in secrecy, preservation, and guardianship. Rosslyn Chapel remains not just a place of worship, but a silent archive, holding stories and symbols that may trace back to the Merovingians themselves, a testament to a lineage and a knowledge the world has tried to forget, but that continues to echo through stone and legend. Off the coast of Nova Scotia, on a small windswept island, lies Oak Island, a place that has captivated treasure hunters for over 2 centuries. Legends tell of buried riches, elaborate tunnels, and traps set to protect something far older than gold. Some theorists believe that Oak Island was not just a site for treasure, but a hiding place for documents and relics connected to the Merovingian bloodline. According to local law, members of the Sinclair family may have sailed across the Atlantic centuries earlier, carrying sacred objects and manuscripts meant to preserve knowledge that could challenge kings and popes alike. Explorers digging on the island have found intricate pit systems, wooden platforms, and mysterious markers, leading some to speculate that they were designed to hide more than material wealth. Certain letters discovered in private collections reference a vault or cache placed where the waters meet the stone, a phrase interpreted by some as a coded reference to Oak Island. Scholars who study the Templars and Merovingian history note that the Sinclairs, known protectors of the Templar secrets in Europe, may have used the New World as a safe haven to keep bloodline information intact. Over the years, hundreds of excavations have taken place, from the early 19th century to the 21st, and yet the full secrets remain hidden. Supporters of the bloodline theory argue that the treasure was never meant to be found by accident, only by those who knew the correct sequence of symbols, measurements, and celestial alignments. The idea that sacred knowledge could survive the Atlantic crossing fits with patterns seen elsewhere. Families linked to the Sinclairs or to Merovingian descendants appear in genealogical records of early colonial settlements along the East Coast. Some researchers point to heraldic symbols carved into early American homes, churches, and cemeteries that match European Merovingian motifs, including bees and fleurs-de-lis. Even the layout of certain towns has been interpreted as reflecting secret geometry known to European initiates. Modern investigations continue using drones, metal detectors, and ground-penetrating radar, but the island seems designed to thwart discovery. Many theorists believe the tunnels were engineered to flood, to mislead, or to protect whatever is buried beneath layers of earth, water, and secrecy. Oak Island has become more than a physical location. It is a symbol of continuity and guardianship, a way for the Merovingian legacy to survive in a world that tried to erase it. If the bloodline, or its knowledge, was brought to America, Oak Island may have been the first waypoint, a carefully chosen site to ensure the preservation of sacred secrets. The island's enduring mystery, coupled with the Sinclairs' historical travels and the parallels with European Templar sites, continues to fuel speculation. For anyone tracing the Merovingian line, Oak Island is not just a treasure hunt, it is a puzzle, a test, and perhaps the most tangible link between Europe's hidden past and the New World, where bloodlines, symbols, and secrets may have found a new home, quietly waiting for those who know how to read the signs. When the United States was born in 1776, the streets, buildings, and ceremonies of the new nation were more than symbols of freedom. Many of the founding fathers were Freemasons, and some historians suggest they carried ideas and emblems that traced back to European secret societies that had long preserved hidden knowledge. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, and other leaders were members of Masonic lodges where rituals involved geometry, symbols, and allegories that hinted at ancient wisdom. Some theorists claim these symbols were not just moral lessons, but encoded signals tied to the protection of sacred bloodlines, possibly even the Merovingian line brought across the Atlantic. The layout of Washington, D.C., for instance, follows patterns that resemble star shapes, obelisks, and alignments known in Masonic teachings. echoing designs found in European cathedrals and castles linked to the Templars and Sinclairs. Some argue that these alignments were deliberate, meant to preserve sacred geometry and to honour lineages that were quietly carried into the New World. Coins, rings, and documents from the early American period bear symbols like the all-seeing eye, bees, and pentagrams, often interpreted as reminders of divine inheritance or guardianship. Freemasonry at the time was a network where knowledge was passed orally in rituals and through secret handshakes, not written in public records, which allowed sensitive information to be preserved without attracting the attention of the general public. Some researchers even suggest that the meticulous attention to dates, ceremonies, and inauguration practices was connected to celestial cycles, the same way European dynasties timed coronations to reinforce divine authority. The connection between Freemasonry and Merovingian symbols implies that some of the founders may have been aware of a lineage worth safeguarding, embedding clues into architecture and ritual. Over time, the symbols spread beyond lodges into public spaces, leaving hidden messages for those who knew how to see them. Street plans, monuments, and government buildings serve not only civic purposes, but possibly also as silent markers of lineage, heritage, and continuity. The Freemasons' influence on early American society created a framework where sacred bloodlines could be remembered even if no one spoke openly about them. Some scholars speculate that this allowed the Merovingian line to survive in anonymity, quietly embedded in a society built on new ideals. The careful placement of symbols, the secrecy of ceremonies, and the choice of founders who were Masons suggest a deliberate effort to carry forward traditions from Europe into a land where oversight was minimal. Whether these connections are coincidence or intentional, they offer a tantalizing perspective on American history, hinting at layers of meaning beneath the surface. Hidden in plain sight, symbols embedded in cities, documents, and rituals may quietly honor a legacy that stretches back over 1,000 years, linking the United States to a bloodline and a story few dare to speak aloud. In the 1930s, as Europe teetered on the edge of war, Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler became obsessed with myths, relics, and ancient bloodlines. The Third Reich was not only a political machine, but also a force fueled by fascination with the supernatural and sacred ancestry. Himmler, the architect of the SS, poured resources into finding objects and knowledge that could validate the idea of a divine and pure lineage for the Germanic peoples. Teams were sent across France, Germany, and even into the Black Forest, scouring castles, monasteries, and remote villages. They were looking for anything that connected rulers of old Europe to sacred blood, sometimes referred to as the Merovingian line by modern researchers. Himmler believed that the assassination of kings and the disappearance of dynasties like the Merovingians had hidden secrets that could reveal divine origins. They searched for relics, manuscripts, and burial sites. The Nazis were particularly interested in anything connected to the Templars, seeing them as guardians of secrets that might reinforce their ideology. Some reports suggest that they explored the Pyrenees, questioning locals about legends of hidden tombs, strange symbols, and cryptic maps. The obsession extended to Mary Magdalene as well, following stories that she had travelled to France and left descendants who carried sacred blood. Himmler speculated that uncovering this lineage could justify a mythical Aryan ancestry and link it to Christendom itself. The Nazis also believed that certain manuscripts and artifacts, once hidden by the Vatican or secret societies, contained coded genealogies and knowledge about the sacred line. The search was not just theoretical. They excavated ruins, confiscated church documents, and documented every lead with precision. Even castles built in the Middle Ages were studied for geometric patterns, symbols, and chambers that could hide relics. Reports mention that some teams found items with bees, crosses, and roses, symbols tied to European dynasties that predated the Carolingians. The obsession was more than ideology. It was almost ritualistic. Hitler and Himmler viewed history as a map and sacred bloodlines as a path to power and legitimacy. Scholars note that their interest was selective, focusing on what could be manipulated to support racial myths rather than authentic historical study. The pursuit also fueled expeditions into Tibet and other distant lands, where they sought evidence of lost knowledge and ancient civilizations. Some accounts claim that whatever the Nazis uncovered in France and Germany disappeared after the war, leaving behind only hints and rumors, fueling decades of speculation about sacred lineages and hidden treasures. The story of the Nazi obsession with relics and bloodlines is a chilling reminder of how myths can be weaponized, how curiosity and faith can be twisted into something deadly, and how the shadow of sacred lineage can inspire both reverence and violence. It is a chapter of history that remains partly secret, partly speculative, and entirely fascinating for those who follow the echoes of lost bloodlines across time. After 1945, Europe was left in ruins, but the mysteries the Nazis had chased did not disappear. Allied forces uncovered some of the SS records, confiscated artifacts, and seized libraries, but many archives were missing or deliberately removed from public view. Stories emerged about documents, maps, and manuscripts that had vanished, some allegedly containing information about sacred bloodlines, Merovingian relics, and secret tombs. Researchers and historians noticed gaps in the records, files that should have existed according to previous inventories, yet nowhere to be found. Whispers circulated that these missing archives were not lost by accident, but hidden by powerful individuals who wanted the knowledge to remain secret. Some claim intelligence agencies, fearing the destabilizing potential of a revealed bloodline, quietly secured these materials. Others suggest that surviving Nazi operatives moved them to private vaults, or even to the Americas, ensuring that whoever knew the truth could control it. In Germany and France, locals told stories of unexplained disappearances. Scholars, treasure hunters, and journalists who probed Nazi-era sites sometimes vanished or returned with warnings, fueling speculation that the search for sacred relics continued in secret. The Vatican and certain secret societies were rumoured to have absorbed some of the items and documents, creating layers of secrecy that made tracing the original materials almost impossible. In Italy, hidden crypts were investigated decades after the war, uncovering symbols similar to those tied to Merovingian kings, but the actual objects were gone. In some cases, letters or notes survived, hinting at locations or codes that never led to concrete discoveries. Even in the 1970s and 80s, private collectors surfaced with fragments of manuscripts that had supposedly belonged to the Templars or Nazi research teams, but they were incomplete, fragmented, and often sealed with warnings not to disclose. The phenomenon created a sense that the hunt for sacred bloodlines had moved underground, from physical excavation to careful custodianship by those who believed the knowledge was too powerful to be exposed. Some modern historians argue that these post-war secrets have been exaggerated, that most missing archives were simply destroyed or misfiled, yet the patterns of absence remain intriguing. Across Europe, maps, symbols, and coded correspondences suggest that the Nazis, the Templars, and later custodians were following similar trails, indicating continuity in the effort to protect or conceal sacred knowledge. The post-war period became not only a time of reconstruction, but also a hidden era where mysteries continued in shadows, quietly shaping rumours, legends, and modern conspiracies. For anyone looking for the truth behind the bloodline or lost relics, the world after 1945 is a reminder that what is missing can be as important as what is found, and that secrets, once pursued with obsession, can survive in silence for decades, waiting for those who dare to search again. Walk through the streets of Paris, and suddenly you notice something strange, a street layout that seems too precise, a square here, a circle there, a line that cuts perfectly between monuments, as if someone had drawn a secret map over the city. Then think of Washington, D.C., a city planned by men who were Freemasons, who drew star-shaped avenues, aligned the Capitol with the Potomac, and placed obelisks that reach for the sky like ancient markers. Across continents, patterns emerge that feel deliberate, not accidental. In churches and cathedrals, the lines of windows, the placement of pillars, and the floors themselves sometimes form geometric shapes, some so exact that mathematicians and historians alike have paused in wonder. Some suggest these are reminders, subtle codes from the past, linking Europe to the New World, carrying symbols meant to be understood only by those who knew where to look. Pentagrams, roses, circles, and triangles appear again and again, etched into stone, stitched into carpets, carved in wood. Often, these same motifs appear in American architecture, not as decoration, but as echoes of European mysteries. Freemasons, Templars, and secret societies are often credited with preserving these designs, embedding messages about lineage, divine right, and hidden knowledge in plain sight. Streets, plazas, and government buildings become living diagrams, maps connecting sacred sites and symbols that once marked the Merovingian bloodline. Observers note the repetition of the bee, the fleur-de-lis, the five-petaled rose, symbols originally tied to ancient kings, now recurring in city seals, courthouse emblems, and even coins. Some historians argue that this is coincidence, that geometry and beauty often overlap, but others see intent, continuity, and secrecy preserved over centuries. Even astronomical alignments come into play, with structures facing solstices, equinoxes, and specific star patterns, suggesting knowledge of the heavens encoded in earthly cities. Across the Atlantic, American universities, libraries, and government buildings exhibit similar alignments, as if Europe had whispered its secrets into the New World. Some researchers believe that hidden messages were transported by European settlers, including families like the Sinclairs, carrying sacred lineage and symbols to protect and encode across oceans. Maps, old documents, and family records hint that this was not random, that symbols and geometry were part of a careful system to preserve knowledge that could not be openly spoken. Whether you see them as art, ritual, or secret code, the repetition of patterns creates a sense of connection, a web that spans oceans and centuries, linking sacred European sites to American soil. The idea that someone long ago intended for future generations to notice, interpret, or follow these signs is thrilling, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. Every plaza, every chapel, every obelisk is a node in a hidden network, and if you follow them carefully, you begin to see the thread that ties Europe and America together, carrying whispers of bloodlines, hidden knowledge, and a story that refuses to be forgotten. Imagine a library filled with ancient scrolls, the smell of old parchment and ink hanging in the air, rows upon rows of manuscripts that have survived centuries of fire, war, and neglect. Some of these texts were once public, celebrated for their wisdom or beauty, but over time, certain books vanished, quietly removed from shelves and hidden away. Scholars whisper that these lost manuscripts hold knowledge that the church and rulers could not allow to circulate, information so sensitive it could change history itself. Among these, there are rumoured to be genealogies, sacred records of bloodlines, and even personal accounts written by those who claim descent from Mary Magdalene and Jesus. Many of these texts are said to have been smuggled during wars, hidden in private collections, or locked away in secret vaults where only a few trusted hands could access them. In France, old abbeys and monasteries that once preserved knowledge now show gaps in their archives, pages missing, whole volumes unaccounted for, sparking speculation that they were deliberately removed. Some of the most intriguing manuscripts are said to be coded, filled with symbols, numbers, and cryptic phrases that conceal meaning from ordinary readers. Deciphering them requires knowledge of languages long forgotten, esoteric symbols, and historical events scattered across centuries. Certain accounts suggest that the Knights Templar were entrusted with these texts before their suppression in the early 14th century, moving them to hidden locations in Europe. Others claim that the Cathars also protected some manuscripts in the Pyrenean Mountains, surviving the brutal Albigensian Crusade by burying books in caves or passing them down through secret lineages. Across Italy, Spain, and even the British Isles, private libraries, university collections, and monasteries occasionally reveal fragments of these lost works. A single folio might surface, showing a lineage, a coded map, or a reference to a bloodline that has been erased from history books. Modern technology has started to uncover these secrets, with digital archives revealing manuscripts once thought lost, and scholars using AI to reconstruct faded text or match stylistic fingerprints across continents. Yet even with these breakthroughs, many manuscripts remain hidden, tucked away by collectors, institutions, or families who prefer silence over disclosure. The tantalizing question remains whether these texts truly reveal the Merovingian bloodline, or if they are elaborate fabrications layered over centuries of myth and legend. Every new discovery reignites debates, drawing enthusiasts and skeptics alike into a web of history, rumour, and speculation. The manuscripts, lost or hidden, remind us that the story of sacred lineage is not confined to official records, but lives in secret, waiting for someone to find, read, and understand it. And perhaps the real power of these lost texts is not just the knowledge they hold, but the way they survive in shadow, preserving memory even when history tries to erase it. Picture a map spread across an oak table, ink faded but lines still visible, some forming familiar roads and rivers, others twisting into strange shapes that seem to make no sense at first glance. Scholars and treasure hunters alike have long studied maps like these, believing that hidden within their curves and marks are codes left by the Merovingians, Templars, or secret custodians of sacred knowledge. Some of the coordinates point to abandoned abbeys in southern France, caves in the Pyrenees, or even forgotten ruins where stone carvings hold meaning beyond their apparent decoration. Symbols etched on the margins often look like stars, crosses, or spirals, but to those trained in ancient lore, each element could signify a lineage, a direction, or a warning. A line drawn from one site to another sometimes forms geometric patterns, hexagons or pentagrams that might encode astronomical events, equinoxes, or solstices. In some cases, letters and numbers accompany the shapes, written in a code language that combines Latin, Old French, and archaic symbology, requiring decades of study to even partially decode. Researchers suggest these maps were not for everyday navigation, but were more like encrypted guides, pointing only to those who knew the key. Some legends claim that maps were divided into pieces, each kept by a different guardian, so that no one could reconstruct the full path without consent. Across Europe, fragments have surfaced in libraries, private collections, and even tucked behind frescoes in ancient churches. Modern technology has opened new ways to study them, using satellite imaging and pattern recognition to detect alignments that human eyes might miss. Some maps appear to correlate with underground tunnels, hidden vaults, or secret burial sites, as if the Earth itself contains a coded story waiting to be read. In England, old parchments hint at coordinates leading to Rosslyn Chapel, while in France, the markings align with Rennes-Larteau and Montguer. These patterns stretch across continents, connecting sacred sites with celestial events, and perhaps with the bloodlines the Merovingians sought to protect. Cryptographers have found that repeated symbols across different maps may indicate the same secret, like the bee, the rose, or the vesica shape, each marking a point of importance. Every new discovery sparks debates about authenticity, interpretation, and intent. Were these maps truly made by the Merovingians, or later groups like the Templars, Freemasons, or Cathars? And, even if genuine, do they point to physical treasures, knowledge, or the location of descendants? The allure of the maps lies not only in what they might reveal, but also in the mystery of their construction, the deliberate obscurity meant to protect the sacred from those unworthy. Following these clues requires patience, skill, and sometimes a leap of faith, because hidden history is rarely straightforward. And perhaps that is the genius of these maps and codes. They exist not just as guides, but as guardians of a story, a lineage, and a truth written across the landscape itself, quietly waiting for those who can finally read it. Imagine the Holy Grail not as a golden cup or jewel-encrusted chalice, but as a signal, a message encoded in symbols, rituals, and stories passed down over centuries. The Grail becomes less about what you hold in your hands and more about what you understand when you look closer. For centuries, knights, monks, and secret societies have searched for it, believing it could grant eternal life or divine favor. But what if its real power lay in communication rather than possession? Some researchers suggest that the Grail represents a lineage, a sacred bloodline, a code embedded in art, architecture, and manuscripts. Its message travels across time, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who know how to read it. Paintings in cathedrals often show subtle clues, colours and gestures pointing toward people, places or events that ordinary viewers would overlook. Frescoes depict vessels, roses, and even children positioned deliberately, signalling knowledge rather than hoarded treasure. Medieval manuscripts contain marginalia, tiny notes, and drawings that seem like decoration but may act as markers for important secrets. Each symbol acts like a letter in a message, building a language of its own. Even in architecture, the dimensions of abbeys, the placement of windows, and the alignment of towers may encode astronomical events or cycles tied to sacred rituals. The Grail, in this sense, is a transmitter, carrying information from one generation to the next, designed to protect the bloodline and its legacy from the uninitiated. Templars, Cathars, and even later groups like the Freemasons may have acted as custodians, interpreting and passing on the signal rather than hiding a physical object. Some modern theorists extend this idea further, suggesting that the Grail could exist digitally today, encoded in literature, data, and even hidden within art and architecture as a form of metadata. Each discovery of a hidden symbol or coded text becomes a small reception of the signal, a way to reconnect with centuries of preserved knowledge. The Grail's journey from the Holy Land to Europe, into secret societies, and perhaps even across the Atlantic, can be seen as a deliberate effort to transmit information safely and quietly. Its story is not about conquest or wealth, but continuity, ensuring that sacred knowledge survives the decay of time, war, and politics. Perhaps the Grail has never been lost at all, only misunderstood, misinterpreted, and recast as a treasure in the material sense. By seeing it as a signal, we understand why so many groups risked everything to guard its legacy, why symbols repeat, and why certain sites align across landscapes. The Grail is alive not because it can pour wine or heal wounds, but because its message persists, travelling invisibly through art, bloodlines, and memory, connecting those who can read its signal across centuries, waiting for understanding, waiting for recognition, and waiting for the moment its story is truly heard. Imagine a quiet house in the hills of southern France, or a stone cottage in rural Switzerland, or a simple townhouse in Massachusetts. Perhaps in these places, hidden from public eyes, the bloodline survives, flowing quietly through veins that may never know the full story of their heritage. For centuries, families have preserved documents, relics, and names that whisper of a legacy too dangerous to proclaim openly. Their lives are ordinary on the surface, but underneath, a web of history stretches back through forgotten kings, secret rituals, and sacred knowledge. The bloodline may no longer seek thrones or crowns. It may have learned that survival is more important than power, that the most precious inheritance is secrecy itself. Across Europe, you can still find small hints. A coat of arms here, a family crest there, symbols embedded in jewelry or architecture, subtle reminders of a legacy that refuses to die. Even the names passed down from generation to generation may carry echoes of the past, a silent code pointing to something extraordinary hidden in plain sight. Modern genealogists have traced certain lines through centuries of marriages and migrations, yet the trail is deliberately obscured, scattered across countries, cultures, and even continents. Some descendants may be unaware of what they carry, living ordinary lives without realizing they are connected to kings and saints, Templars and Freemasons, custodians of a secret that has shaped history in silence. Others may carry knowledge in fragments, oral traditions whispered from grandmother to granddaughter, stories that never reached official records, but preserve truth nonetheless. Technology has made it possible to uncover pieces of this puzzle, yet the true heart of the bloodline remains elusive, protected by layers of history, secrecy, and discretion. Perhaps its survival is its greatest victory, proving that even centuries of redactions, wars, and inquisitions cannot erase what is sacred. Even today, as we walk through city streets, attend school, or sit in libraries, we may unknowingly cross paths with descendants, their existence hidden in the rhythm of ordinary life. The Maravinian line, if it continues, has learned patience. It waits, not for recognition, not for validation, but for the right time, or perhaps for no time at all, existing quietly, a thread linking past and present. And maybe that is the true power of the legacy. It cannot be burned, erased, or sold. It survives because it is carried in blood, memory, and action. A child born today may carry it unknowingly, the symbols and rituals living in coded stories, heirlooms, and silent devotion. History has tried to forget, the church has tried to suppress, and rulers have tried to rewrite the story, yet the line endures. And so, the mystery remains alive, a shadow beneath the surface of the world, waiting for eyes patient enough to notice, for minds curious enough to question, and for hearts open enough to imagine. The bloodline is waiting, and in that waiting, it keeps its greatest secret, alive, enduring, and forever hidden in the shadows.